Carrie Michaels. I just spoke with some of you in our round robin event that we just had, and I'm moderating this session today. This is a presentation of the Nationwide Agricultural Experiment Station Coordinating Group called Health, Wellbeing, and Economic Opportunity for LGBT People in Rural Environments. This is also an extension of the year's work that we've been doing in the Children, Youth, and Family Consortium with Dr. Jennifer McGuire, our scholar in residence, on meeting the needs of transgender youth. So we have spent this past year traveling around the state doing presentations in communities outside of the cities and one in Minneapolis on transgender youth, talking about the research and mental health needs and nutritional needs. And from that, we got a lot of feedback that there's a lot more interest and demand in this topic area. In rural areas for all LGBT youth, and also some of those requests were coming from Extension. So I'm really glad that this group was here. We're really fortunate to have them. The purpose of this committee that you have in front of you is to first create an infrastructure for research and outreach projects across states, and they will talk more about that, and then to create and support a pipeline for people doing this work with LGBT people in rural areas. So this group has spent 2 years developing a plan for their work together, and they're now in their first year of a 5-year approved plan through the Agricultural Experiment Station. And each year they go, as I understand it, to a different location, a different state, and now they're here. And so we're lucky to have them. Thank you all. The way that we're going to do the rest of our time here is I'm going to ask each person to come up here and introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their research expertise, and then what they bring to this collaborative project. So they each have a few slides, and then we have time at the end, plenty of time for question and answer.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us here. It's really a wonderful opportunity to meet with my colleagues and to have you as new colleagues, and I'm looking forward to sharing what we're doing in Illinois, and especially looking forward to hearing what you think about that and the ways that we can possibly inform each other's work and collaborate in any kind of future effort. So my name is Ramona Oswald. I'm a professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I am here with two of my students, Jasmine Roughton and Alyssa Billington, and they are also involved in the work that I'm going to talk about today. And I will also say Courtney Cuthbertson, who's sitting here many, many years ago, was involved in this as a student, and she has since moved on successfully. Very successfully. Okay. So for a little over 19 years, I have been at the University of Illinois, and I have been studying LGBT individuals and families in the context of non-metropolitan communities. And in Illinois, the sort of language of that is downstate Illinois. So I'm not talking about Chicago, I'm not talking about the suburbs, I'm talking about kind of I-80 and south. And I think the conceptual equivalent would be outstate Minnesota. And so some of it is extremely rural country, and it's sort of micropolitan areas where you've got kind of a small micropolitan area, 30 miles of corn and soy, and then another micropolitan area, and then 30 miles of corn and soy, et cetera. And it's also important to recognize that there is public transportation in specific places, but across specific places, you kind of have to do Chicago down. And so there's very little opportunity to move across communities in the region, and that creates a kind of an isolation that I think is important to recognize when you're talking about people who may have a resource deficit in their community and may need to go somewhere else to find it, that level of kind of rurality obstacles is important to recognize. So I want to talk a little more specifically about two different projects that have been going on in this regional context. And Rainbow, Illinois, I first collected survey data for Rainbow, Illinois in the year 2000. And I worked for an entire year introducing myself across the state, traveling around saying, hi, I'm newly hired at the U of I. It's my job to kind of work with you. We have a land-grant mission. If you ever hear from me in the future, I hope that you will respond. This was, email was new, and everything was, stamps and phone calls and visiting in person. And I was able to collect data. The people at the university said, good luck, you're probably not going to be able to do that. There really aren't any gay people out here. They all moved to Chicago. And we distributed 2,000 surveys, and we got 527 back. So that was in itself was kind of amazing to be able to say, like, look, like, here are these people. I can tell you what zip codes they live in. I'm not going to give you any more personal than that, but I can situate these people in your communities, and we were able to use that survey data to advocate for human rights protections at different municipal hearings. We've done some analyses for public health around certain kinds of behaviors. Different community organizations have asked for sort of what's the profile in my community. The document that Jasmine was handing around is the follow-up. In 2010 and 2011, we did the same project, but 10 years later. And so it's the same methodology, the same region, but it's not necessarily the same people, and we can't really track that. But you can see in there that we've been able to track that there have been a tremendous amount of positive changes. We have tremendous legal equality. That data was collected before marriage equality, but at the level of state human rights protections, including transgender people, not just sexual minorities, there's been a huge improvement in the legal framework. And in many places, there's been a huge improvement in the social climate, too, but not always. And several things that we found is that, one, the social climate is still problematic, and often in smaller places or from religious sources. And two, the gay community, the LGBT queer community is still a problem. And what I mean by that is there may be an organized community, it may be informal networks, but they tend to be kind of either cliquish or very specifically focused or transient. So by cliquish, I mean it might be a small group of friends, and if one of them's your ex and you're in a small town, you're probably not going to want to belong. If they're focused around a specific issue, it might be, well, this is like a Bible study that meets at a diner on the highway, and if you're not, interested in studying the Bible with this particular group of people, it might not be your thing, right? So then you lack access to that. In terms of transients, and this is particularly true in Champaign-Urbana, we're a college town, and so people come in, they do amazing stuff, they leave. They come to Minneapolis. People come in, right, Az? They come in, they leave, and so it's not just the challenges of the non-metro rural infrastructure being relatively resource poor, but that the resources that we have flow in and out, and there's no way we're ever going to stop that. That's the nature of the community, but it's a challenge for how you sustain resources. So I have 1 minute left. And what I want to say is that we are currently moving beyond the Rainbow, Illinois data to interview stakeholders about their perceptions. We know a lot about what LGBTQ people have said about their lives over time. We are now going to agency stakeholders like city council members, police officers, social workers, potentially extension educators, and asking, like, how do you understand the needs of LGBTQ individuals and families in your community? To what extent do you own that? How does your agency respond? What do you think the overall context of this community, how does that influence what you're able to do or not do? So we're currently moving into more of a community level of analysis. And I think it's really exciting and wonderful, and it is off the ground. But I really only have some kind of basic findings to share with you today. And so I will say that what we know now from the stakeholders is that they seem really attuned to trans issues, especially trans youth, and less actually aware and knowledgeable about, say, same-sex couples parenting. And there's sort of this assumption among stakeholders of, oh, those people are fine, they have marriage, and they're probably affluent anyway. So we're dealing with this sort of class bias that people have that's limiting what they're able to actually perceive in their environment. The stakeholders are really clueless about LGBT community dynamics and often talk about resources as if they exist when they don't. So everybody we've interviewed has said, oh, well, we have the community center. But that community center continues to struggle and at times has had almost no programming. And the people who are making those referrals don't even understand that. So there's a level of ignorance in terms of, they're trying to be helpful, right? But they don't quite grasp what's there. And their agency has not invested in helping sustain that organization. We also know that the Rainbow Illinois respondents, people talk about overall things are tolerant. They're better than they used to be, and there's lots of support in certain pockets, but there's also hostility in others. And so you get this sort of math of, so things are kind of in the middle. And that creates challenges because it inhibits people's ability to really own the issue. If we talk about it as a, well, don't ask, don't tell, or that's just those people, or it's fine, just don't talk about it, it prevents people from really owning and moving forward. So that's my time, and I look forward to talking about it more with you. Thank you very much. I'll say a couple of different things about that. One, if you look at LGBT parents and their kids, they're more likely to live in less urban environments. Now, not necessarily rural, but smaller town, maybe kind of outer ring suburbs, than they are to live in the city, and that they are to live in a quote unquote gayborhood in the city. And so in some ways, we have a real problem with our knowledge on LGBT parented families being based in highly selective, highly specific, urban, easy to find the gays communities. So much of the research has sampled from San Francisco, from New York, right? And that's simply not, their experiences are simply not reflective of possibly the majority of people who are parenting in those situations. So in some ways, studying rural issues is a corrective to this bias that we have that somehow, urban equals gay, rural equals not gay, and if you had any sense, if you were gay, you would leave, right? And so it's also claiming that LGBT people have always been part of rural communities. It's nothing new that suddenly we're studying it. And there may be unique ways of having relationships or formulating identities that are perhaps more rural or more focused on family connections or relationships with the land or some kind of thing other than a more urban-based symbolism. And so there may be unique factors there. I can find the queer person in any community. I accept that challenge. I think you have to take seriously the value as a researcher of knowing your community, and that as a researcher you are doing something with people and that is ultimately going to in some way benefit them or be for them, and that you will not have a lot of success if you maintain a kind of an outsider stance who's just going to do kind of a slash and burn and get your data and get out. So I think you have to, it's very important that you establish yourself as somebody who's worth taking seriously, because you will treat people with respect and you will bring something to the table that benefits them. So I think that that's a challenge. I think it's also just a matter of being creative. Like just think through, like, well, what are all the things I could think about? Like, how could I find the affirming church? Like, how do I figure out which bar might be the gay bar? Where do I go online to find people? How about I go talk to a librarian and look at the books? Like, you just have to sort of become conversant in all the different ways that a community works to sort of figure it out. And make those things kind of visible and transparent, that you might otherwise just not think about because they're just part of how you move as an individual through a community. You have to think about how another person might be moving through the community to find them. There's an association between jobs that are classified as bohemian or creative class. And so bohemian would be like arts-based employment, and creative class are jobs where you are sort of creating something new as part of your job rather than just sort of reproducing human capital or reproducing some kind of physical product. And so we also track the percentage of jobs in the county that were labeled that way, classified that way by the Department of Labor. So churches, labor, and then we were able to have, to use census data on the proportion of households that were with same-sex couples that were measured in the census. And yeah, that was it. Yeah, so, and that index where, you measure things and come up with a score for each, that is highly correlated with a subjective measure that we asked of Rainbow Illinois participants. How would you rate your community? Would you say it was hostile, tolerant, or supportive? And there was a very strong, it was like a 0.7, yeah, correlation, so. The community report, the Rainbow report that got passed around, I think, is a really helpful resource because it's a lot of information and it's very descriptive and you could just look at it in itself, but it's also kind of a reference sheet where you can look at it and be like, oh, okay, they've got information about that. So I know I could go talk to Ramona and find out more about that and maybe even find out how it's specific in my community. So I think it's helpful to have just sort of broad kind of reference resources that help you think about who you're going to ask to get the more specific stuff from. Those kinds of comments, whether they're from children or adults, are great, right? Because they put the issue right there on the table and you can respond to it. And, that kid was just maybe ignorant, but like not mean-intentioned or anything, and you were able to respond in a way that was educational, and it had an impact not just on the kid, but also on the parent, and, there's a little, bit of community change in that interaction, so good for the kid for saying that, so you could have that opportunity. I would like very much to see more community ownership, and really challenging communities to not just sort of know that, oh yeah, the LGBT people are here, but we celebrate them and we understand they might have unique concerns and here's the ways that this community can respond to it, and really kind of putting the burden on other people as allies or as stakeholders in the community to take the initiative to move things forward, and not to do that instead of or at the expense of, LGBT people themselves. But too often, I think, in rural communities, LGBT people do feel like, it's only here because we put it here. And it would be great to have much more community buy-in. And how to make that happen, I'm hoping in our project we can figure that out a little bit better. So based on the stakeholder interviews that we've been doing, it's been interesting to sort of think about what the person's position is and how much they actually know about sort of queer family issues. And I would have to say, based on who Jasmine and I have interviewed so far, that it's the pastor who really knows. And that makes sense, right? So I guess if I was going to drop down into a community to figure out the unknown unknown, I think the first place I might go is the pastor of a congregation that has a reputation for being open and affirming. And I would talk to them because I bet they're seeing it and I bet they're somewhat conversant in it. And they may feel like they don't know who else in the community they can talk to about it, but that's where I would go first.